Hey guys, tonight we step softly, very softly, into the humid embrace of a Cambodian evening, decades ago. Imagine the air, thick with the scent of frangipani and the distant, almost imperceptible aroma of cooking fires. The sun has bled away, leaving streaks of violet and bruised orange across the horizon, and now a deep indigo blanket is settling over the landscape. You're there, perhaps in a small village nestled beside the Mekong River, the water a ribbon of polished obsidian in the gathering dark. The gentle lapping of water against the stilted houses is a constant, soothing rhythm, and the chirping of crickets and geckos is the dominant sound, a natural symphony that has played out for centuries. A few flickering oil lamps cast dancing shadows, making familiar shapes seem strange and elongated. There's a deceptive peace here, a sense of timelessness, but we're exploring a past that, while seemingly tranquil on its surface, carries an undercurrent, a whisper of the profound and devastating changes to come. And if you were truly there, knowing what we know now, you probably wouldn't survive this impending storm with your spirit, or perhaps even your life, entirely unscathed. It's a journey into a heart of darkness, but one we'll navigate with gentle steps, focusing on the human story within the storm. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, as always, I'd love to see you say hello in the comments. Tell us your location and what time it is where you are. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from as we embark on these historical drifts together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air is warm, isn't it? You can feel that distinct Southeast Asian humidity, a gentle weight on your skin, making the thin cotton of your imagined clothes cling just a little. The sounds of the village are fading as true night arrives. Perhaps a dog barks in the distance, a brief, sharp sound quickly absorbed by the immensity of the dark. The stars, unpolluted by city glare, are beginning to emerge, scattered like diamond dust across the vast canvas above. You might be sitting on a worn wooden veranda, your feet dangling just above the cool earth, listening to the elders share stories, their voices a low murmur, punctuated by the occasional soft laugh. These are tales of ancient kingdoms, of spirits that inhabit the rice paddies and forests, of courage and love and the cyclical nature of life. There's a comfort in these familiar narratives, a sense of continuity and belonging. This Cambodia, the one that existed before the maelstrom, was a kingdom of ancient lineage, tracing its roots back to the magnificent Khmer Empire, the architects of Angkor Wat, a mainstream historical fact that speaks to a legacy of incredible artistry and societal organization. The temple complex itself, even in its later, more subdued centuries, remained a potent symbol of a glorious past. You can almost feel the ghosts of that empire in the gentle breeze that rustles the palm fronds overhead. Life for many, particularly in the rural expanses where the vast majority of Cambodians lived, was tied to the rhythms of the seasons, to the planting and harvesting of rice. It was a life of hard work, certainly, but also one interwoven with festivals, with deep family bonds, and a pervasive Buddhist faith that shaped a worldview of compassion, karma, and reincarnation. Yet, even in this idyllic setting, there are undercurrents, subtle shifts that a casual observer might miss. The world outside Cambodia is in a state of flux. Colonial powers have redrawn maps across the globe, and their influence has washed over Southeast Asia, bringing new ideas, new technologies, but also new forms of control and simmering resentments. France has held sway over Cambodia, part of its Indo-Chinese Union, for decades, while some in the urban centers, particularly Phnom Penh, might have adapted to French customs, even embraced aspects of French education and culture. In the countryside, the old ways often persisted, sometimes in quiet defiance, sometimes in pragmatic coexistence. Historians still debate the true extent and nature of anti-colonial sentiment in Cambodia in these pre-war years. Was it a widespread, deeply felt yearning for complete independence, or was it more a collection of localized grievances, manipulated by emerging political factions? The narratives here are complex, often colored by the later, tragic events. It's easy to look back and see an inevitable path to disaster. But on a night like this, under these stars, for the people living it, the future was as veiled and uncertain as it is for any of us. They probably weren't thinking about geopolitical shifts. They were thinking about the next harvest, a sick child, a leaky roof. You know, the usual life stuff that occupies our minds, even when history is sharpening its claws just out of sight. It's a bit like worrying about whether you left the stove on while a meteor is silently heading for your house. The French presence, while perhaps not overtly oppressive in every corner of daily life for every single peasant, nonetheless created a layered society. There were those who benefited from the colonial administration, who found opportunities in the new systems, and there were those who felt marginalized, their traditional ways of life and systems of authority subtly eroded. These weren't necessarily armed revolutionaries, not yet, but the seeds of discontent could find fertile ground in such disparities. Imagine a young, ambitious Cambodian, educated perhaps in a French-style lycée, reading about revolutions and self-determination in other parts of the world. Such ideas, once planted, have a way of growing, sometimes in unexpected and thorny directions. The night deepens. The oil lamps might be sputtering now, casting even longer, more fantastic shadows. The distant sounds of the river, the lifeblood of this land, are a constant lullaby. You might hear the soft thud of a ripe mango falling from a nearby tree, a reminder of nature's quiet abundance. It's so peaceful. It's almost hard to fathom the horrors that this very land will witness. But the quietude of this specific night doesn't mean absence of issues. Perhaps there's a village elder complaining about taxes, or a young man frustrated by the lack of opportunity beyond the rice fields. Maybe there's a quiet discussion about news trickling in from Saigon or Paris, news that seems so far away, yet is slowly, inexorably, drawing Cambodia into its vortex. It's like that one relative who lives far away, but somehow always manages to stir up drama at family gatherings. You hear whispers of their exploits long before they actually arrive to flip the buffet table. The beauty of the Cambodian night, the scent of the earth, the sounds of nature. All of these are real. The warmth of family, the solace of faith. These are also real. But the stage is being set, unknowingly, for a tragedy of almost unimaginable proportions. The characters are moving into place, some with grand designs, others simply trying to live their lives. The whispers are there, in the rustling leaves, in the hushed conversations, in the unasked questions hanging in the humid air. You feel a sense of melancholy, perhaps a premonition that this deep, enveloping peace is fragile, like a soap bubble shimmering beautifully in the last light, about to be pricked. It's a sobering thought, this quiet before the storm, a reminder that history often turns on the most ordinary of days, in the most ordinary of places, until, suddenly, nothing is ordinary ever again. The air is still, holding its breath. The night deepens around you, the air still carrying that mix of damp earth and sweet, unseen blossoms. The last of the village lamps might be extinguished now. Families retiring to their mats, leaving the world to the moon and the stars, and the myriad tiny sounds of the tropical night. You feel that sense of continuity we spoke of, the peaceful rhythm of rural life. And it's into this world, or one very much like it, that a boy named Saloth Sar was born. The individual who would later adopt the name Pol Pot. The exact date of his birth is one of those details that seems to shimmer and shift, much like the heat haze on a Cambodian road. While 1928 is often cited, some sources suggest it might have been 1925, a little biographical mystery to start us off. Imagine him, a small child in the village of Prek Spauv in Kampong Tom province. It's a fairly prosperous farming family, not destitute, not aristocratic, but comfortable by local standards. His family even had connections to the royal court. A cousin was a consort, and his older brother and sister would later find work in the palace. So, not exactly a rags to riches, or perhaps rags to absolute power story, more like a comfortable start to unimaginable tyranny tale. You can almost picture young Sar, can't you? Perhaps a quiet boy, perhaps observant. The sounds of his childhood would have been similar to those you're hearing now. The croaking of frogs in the flooded paddies, the chirping of insects, the distant call of a night bird. He would have felt the same sun, the same monsoonal rains. For a time, he lived in a Buddhist monastery, a common experience for many Cambodian boys, serving the monks, learning chants, absorbing the tenets of a faith that emphasizes compassion and nonviolence. It's a stark contrast, isn't it, to the path he would eventually carve through his nation's heart. One mainstream historical fact is that Saloth Sar did indeed spend time as a monk, which makes his later actions all the more confounding for many. It's like finding out a renowned pacifist secretly collects antique weaponry and then uses it to redecorate their neighbor's house. The gentle sway of the palm trees in the imagined breeze, the distant sound of water. It all creates a lulling effect. As a young boy, he's sent to Phnom Penh, the capital, a bustling, vibrant city, especially compared to his rural village. Here, French influence is much more palpable. Wide boulevards, colonial architecture, a different pace of life. He attends a Catholic school, another layer to his education, another set of influences. One wonders what impressions these experiences left on his young mind. Did he feel a sense of displacement, of ambition? Or was he just a boy trying to find his way? Like any other, academic circles remain divided about the precise impact of these early experiences on his later ideological development. Were the seeds of his radicalism sown here, or did they only truly sprout much later? In the cafes of Paris, he wasn't, by most accounts, a particularly brilliant student in the conventional sense. No academic fireworks, no shining promise of a future scholar. He was described as mediocre, even unremarkable, in his studies. Perhaps he was a late bloomer, or perhaps his talents lay elsewhere, hidden, waiting for a different kind of stage. It's often the quiet ones you have to watch out for, isn't it? While everyone's focused on the show-offs, The quiet ones are busy re-engineering the entire set. His path was not one of intellectual prowess initially, but he did gain a scholarship through those royal connections to study in Paris. Radio technology, of all things. Imagine that. The man who would later try to drag his country back to an agrarian year zero initially went to study wireless communication. The irony is thick enough to spread on toast. So, picture him, a young man in his early 20s, stepping off a ship or a plane into the heart of post-war Paris, the late 1940s, early 1950s, a city buzzing with intellectual ferment, with existentialism, with anti-colonial movements, and with vigorous debates about Marxism and communism. It must have been a world away from the rice paddies of Preux-Bauve or even the comparatively sedate Phnom Penh. The lamplit streets of Paris, the scent of coffee and Gauloise, the passionate discussions in smoky cafes. You can almost feel the chill of a Parisian night, so different from the humid warmth we began with. He's far from home, immersed in a culture of radical ideas. It's here that his political awakening, or perhaps his political transformation, truly begins. He falls in with a group of Cambodian students, a circle that would later form the nucleus of the Khmer Rouge leadership. Names like Ieng Sari, Khieu Samphan, they are all there, young men, like him, studying, talking, dreaming of a different future for their homeland. They are absorbed by Marxist texts, by the idea of revolution, of throwing off the shackles of colonialism and feudalism. It's easy to see the appeal, perhaps, a sense of purpose, of belonging, of being part of a grand historical sweep. They are disillusioned with the monarchy back home, with the French influence, and they see in communism a path to a purified, independent Cambodia. Some historians question whether their understanding of Marxism was deep and nuanced, or a more simplified, potent brew suited to their specific grievances and ambitions. It's like grabbing a complex philosophical treatise and only reading the bits that confirm you should definitely break up with your current political system. The young Saloth Sar, the one who is perhaps quiet and unremarkable, finds his voice in these circles. He becomes involved in political activities, joins the French Communist Party. He writes articles, though not under his own name. He is shaping his ideology, or perhaps his ideology is shaping him. The quiet waters, it seems, were running deep after all. He's no longer just a student of radio technology. He's becoming a student of revolution. The distant sounds of a Parisian accordion might drift through an open window, a stark contrast to the intense political discussions happening within. He neglects his studies, unsurprisingly, and eventually, his scholarship is revoked. His Parisian interlude, the one that was meant to equip him with technical skills, instead equips him with a radical, uncompromising vision. The soft rain that might be falling on the Parisian cobblestones outside seems to underscore a period of intense internal transformation, washing away the old, preparing the ground for something new and, as history would show, terrifyingly destructive. The city lights shimmer on the wet streets, a world away from the moonlit Mekong, yet inextricably linked by the journey of this one young man, whose path is slowly, irrevocably, turning towards the shadows. The Parisian night hangs heavy, much like the Gauloise's smoke in those student cafes we imagined. Saloth Sar, his scholarship now a memory, is fully immersed in a different kind of education. The city, for him, is less about the Eiffel Tower sparkling against the velvet sky, or romantic walks along the Seine under the soft glow of gas lamps. and more about clandestine meetings, pamphlets printed in secret, and the intoxicating allure of revolutionary theory. You can almost hear the low, urgent hum of conversation, the clinking of coffee cups, the rustle of newspapers filled with stories of distant struggles for independence that felt, to him and his comrades, intensely personal. The echoes of these Parisian years will reverberate through the jungles and rice paddies of Cambodia in ways no one could then predict. It wasn't just any brand of communism that captivated these young Cambodian minds. It was a particularly fervent, anti-colonial, and, some would argue, somewhat romanticized version of Marxism-Leninism, Stalinism, with its emphasis on a strong, centralized party and rapid, state-driven transformation, also held a certain appeal for those impatient for change. One mainstream historical fact is that the Cambodian students in Paris, including Saloth Sar, formed a Cercle Marxist circle, which became a crucial incubator for their radical political views and future leadership of the Khmer Rouge. This wasn't just a casual book club, it was a crucible for forging a shared ideology and a deep sense of camaraderie among future revolutionaries. They were reading Marx, Engels, Lenin, certainly, but also writers who focused on national liberation struggles. The atmosphere in post-war Paris was thick with these ideas. The city was a haven for intellectuals and activists from across the colonized world. There was a palpable sense of history being made, of old empires crumbling and new nations struggling to be born. For a young man from a small, French-controlled kingdom in Southeast Asia, this environment must have been electrifying. He's no longer just Sar, the quiet student. He's part of a global movement. You can imagine him feeling a sense of importance, of destiny, perhaps for the first time. It's a powerful cocktail, youthful idealism, a sense of grievance, and the validation of an international intellectual movement. It's a bit like discovering a new band that perfectly articulates all your teenage angst. Only instead of writing melancholic song lyrics, you start planning to dismantle a nation's social structure. The specific interpretations of Marxist thought that took root in Saloth Sar and his group are a subject of ongoing discussion. Some scholars contend that their understanding was filtered through a lens of intense nationalism and a profound distrust of urban life and intellectuals, despite their own intellectual pursuits in Paris. It's a curious contradiction, isn't it? Denouncing the very milieu that nurtured your own radicalization? This period is crucial because it's where the intellectual framework for the later, brutal Khmer Rouge policies began to form. The idea of a purified, agrarian society, free from foreign influence and corrupting modern influences, started to germinate not in the Cambodian countryside, but in the heart of one of Europe's most sophisticated cities. It's like someone going to a Michelin-starred restaurant and deciding the future of cuisine is actually just unseasoned, boiled potatoes. The distance from home likely played a role too. Cambodia, seen from afar, could be idealized, its problems simplified, its solutions made to seem more straightforward. The complexities of its society, the nuances of its culture, might have become blurred in their revolutionary fervor. They were, in a sense, diagnosing the ills of their nation from a very remote clinic. The city lights of Paris, reflected in the puddles on a rain-slicked street, seem a universe away from the moonlit villages of Cambodia. Yet, decisions and allegiances forged here, under these European skies, would seal the fate of millions in that distant land. The soft hum of the Parisian night, the distant sirens, the murmur of French from passers-by, all formed the backdrop to this intense period of ideological commitment. He wasn't just absorbing ideas, he was also learning about political organization, about secrecy, about discipline. The French Communist Party, though a legal entity, operated with a certain clandestine efficiency that would have impressed an aspiring revolutionary. He learned how to operate within a cell structure, how to communicate discreetly, how to build a dedicated cadre. These were practical skills that would serve him well in the jungles of Cambodia. His failure in formal studies was eclipsed by his success in this informal, but far more consequential, curriculum. He was a C student in radio technology, but an A+ student in revolutionology, a subject most universities wisely choose not to offer. What did he dream about on those Parisian nights? Did he see visions of a liberated Cambodia, a peasant utopia? Or were there darker, more personal ambitions stirring? It's difficult to penetrate the psyche of someone like Saloth Sar. Accounts from those who knew him then are often filtered through the horrifying lens of what came later. He was described as charming by some, quiet and determined by others. Perhaps he possessed a kind of charisma that drew people to him, a conviction that was contagious. Or perhaps he was simply adept at reflecting what others wanted to see. The debates among historians regarding Saloth Sar's early personality and motivations are multifaceted, exploring whether he was a true ideologue from the start or a more opportunistic figure shaped by circumstance. The echoes of Paris would be heard in the Khmer Rouge's extreme agrarian policies, their ruthless efficiency in evacuating cities, their attempt to create new people, untainted by the past. These weren't ideas born solely in the Cambodian jungle. They were incubated, refined, and solidified in the intellectual hothouse of post-war Paris. The irony is profound. A city synonymous with enlightenment and culture became the unlikely forge for an ideology that would lead to the Cambodian genocide. As you imagine the soft glow of a street lamp illuminating a cobblestone alley, perhaps Sar is walking there, his mind alight with plans and theories, the future of his country, an abstract concept he believes he can reshape from thousands of miles away. The gentle lapping of the Seine nearby is a counterpoint to the turbulent thoughts of revolution. A revolution that would eventually consume so much. The Parisian interlude, with its smoky cafes and revolutionary zeal, eventually comes to an end. Saloth Sar, now steeped in Marxist-Leninist ideology and armed with the rudiments of political organization, makes his way back to Cambodia. It's January 1953. Imagine him disembarking, the familiar humid heat of Phnom Penh washing over him, a stark contrast to the cool, damp air of Paris he'd grown accustomed to. The city is a flurry of sound and scent, the chatter of the marketplace, the distant clang of temple bells, the aroma of street food, things that must have felt both deeply familiar and perhaps, now, strangely alien after his years abroad. The night in Cambodia, when it falls, is different too. The cicadas buzz with an intensity you don't find on Parisian boulevards, and the air is thick with the perfume of tropical flowers, a far cry from coal smoke and rain-wet asphalt. He returns to a Cambodia that is itself on the cusp of change. King Norodom Sihanouk, a charismatic and complex figure, is maneuvering for independence from France, a goal that would be achieved later that same year, in November 1953. This is a mainstream historical fact. Cambodia gained its full independence from French colonial rule in 1953, a pivotal moment that reshaped the nation's political landscape. So, Sar arrives not in a dormant colony, but in a nation stirring with political activity, a nation about to reclaim its sovereignty. The atmosphere is charged, a mix of excitement, uncertainty, and opportunity for those with political ambitions. Saloth Sar doesn't immediately burst onto the political scene as a major player. He's still relatively unknown. He initially finds work as a history and geography teacher at a private school. Picture him, standing before a classroom of students, perhaps with a map of the world behind him, talking about faraway lands and historical struggles. It's a surprisingly conventional role for a man now dedicated to radical upheaval. One wonders what his students made of this quiet, seemingly unremarkable teacher. Did any of them sense the revolutionary fire that burned beneath the calm exterior? It's like discovering your mild-mannered librarian is secretly a ninja, completely unexpected, and makes you reconsider all those overdue book finds. But his teaching job is, in many ways, a cover, a means to an end. His real work is happening in the shadows. He reconnects with other leftist sympathizers, many of them veterans of the anti-French resistance, the Khmer Rouge, and begins to involve himself with the nascent communist movement in Cambodia. This movement is, at this stage, relatively small and heavily influenced by, and often subordinate to, the Vietnamese communists. Sar joins the Khmer People's Revolutionary Party KPRP, which would later evolve into the Communist Party of Kampuchea CPK, the organization we know as the Khmer Rouge. The early political stirrings are subtle, like seeds being planted in fertile, if somewhat contested, ground. There are clandestine meetings, often held at night, perhaps in dimly lit rooms, the air thick with anticipation and the low murmur of hushed, earnest voices. You can imagine the flickering candlelight casting long shadows on the walls as strategies are debated, alliances forged, and revolutionary texts discussed. He's putting into practice the lessons learned in Paris: organization, discipline, ideological purity. He's also learning about the specific conditions in Cambodia, the grievances of the peasantry, the existing political factions, the lay of the land. It's one thing to read about revolution in a Parisian apartment. It's quite another to try and foment one in the villages and towns of your homeland. There's a significant question among those who study this period. To what degree was Saloth Sar initially an independent actor versus an operative directed by or heavily influenced by Vietnamese communist cadres? The relationship between the Cambodian and Vietnamese communists was complex, a mixture of cooperation and underlying tension, given the long history between the two nations. Some argue Sar was biding his time, learning from the Vietnamese, but always intending to carve out a distinctly Cambodian path. Others suggest he was more closely aligned in these early days, only later asserting a fiercely independent and ultimately anti-Vietnamese stance. It's a reminder that political journeys are rarely straight lines. They often involve pragmatic alliances and carefully concealed long-term goals. He is described as being meticulous, patient, and skilled at working behind the scenes. He wasn't a fiery orator like Sihanouk, but he was effective in building a network, in identifying and recruiting potential cadres. He understood the importance of a dedicated, disciplined core group. He's like a gardener tending to his secret crop, carefully nurturing each seedling, protecting it from pests, in this case, rival political groups or government scrutiny. And just like some plants turn out to be unexpectedly invasive, these political seedlings would eventually overrun the entire garden with devastating consequences. The nights in Phnom Penh, or perhaps in the rural areas where he also traveled, would have been filled with this quiet, determined work. The distant sounds of the city, or the chorus of frogs and insects in the countryside, provide a constant backdrop to these burgeoning revolutionary activities. He's learning to navigate the political landscape, which is dominated by Prince Sihanouk's Sangkum Reister Neom Popular Socialist Community movement. Sihanouk's popularity and his ability to blend royal charisma with nationalist politics make him a formidable figure. For radical leftists like Sar, operating openly is difficult and dangerous. They are a fringe element. Their message of class warfare and total societal transformation not yet resonating widely in a country that largely revered its monarch and was celebrating its newfound independence. So, the work remains largely underground. He is forging his path, step by cautious step. The homecoming seeds are being sown, not for a harvest of rice, but for a revolution. And as the tropical darkness settles each night, as the oil lamps are lit and the stories are told, these seeds are quietly, almost invisibly, taking root, drawing strength from the soil of discontent, from the idealism of youth, and from the potent theories imported from half a world away. The air, so often filled with the scent of jasmine and frangipani, now also carries the faintest, almost imperceptible, scent of gunpowder and ideological fervor. The gentle lapping of the Mekong River nearby continues its timeless rhythm, unaware of the turbulent currents building beneath the surface of Cambodian society. The relative safety, or perhaps the strategic utility, of operating within Phnom Penh, even under the guise of a school teacher, begins to wane for Saloth Sar and his comrades. Prince Sihanouk's government, while navigating a complex path of neutrality in the Cold War, is not tolerant of homegrown communist threats. The political space for radical dissent is shrinking. So, the movement increasingly looks towards the remote rural areas, towards the dense jungles and mountainous regions, particularly along the borders. It's here, far from the capital's streetlights and the government's immediate gaze, that the jungle murmurs begin to grow into something more substantial. Imagine the transition, leaving the relative comforts of even a clandestine urban existence for the harsh realities of the Cambodian jungle. The nights here are profoundly dark, the canopy so thick that moonlight barely penetrates. Your world shrinks to the small circle of a flickering campfire, or perhaps no light at all, relying on the sounds and smells of the wilderness. The air is heavy with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and unknown blossoms. The soundtrack is a constant, overwhelming chorus of insect calls, the chatter of unseen primates, perhaps the distant growl of a predator. It's a world away from both Parisian cafes and Phnom Penh classrooms. This environment would shape the men and women who inhabited it, fostering resilience, suspicion, and a deep sense of separateness from the outside world. It's in these remote strongholds, starting in the late 1950s and intensifying into the early 1960s, that the Khmer Rouge, or the Khmer Rouge, Red Khmers, as Sihanouk dismissively nicknamed them, began to truly forge their identity and build their strength. Saloth Sar, along with other key figures like Nuon Chea, Ieng Sari, and Sun Sen, plays a pivotal role in this process. He officially becomes secretary of the Workers' Party of Kampuchea, the new name for the KPRP, later renamed the Communist Party of Kampuchea in 1963, following the mysterious disappearance of the previous secretary. To Samuth. This ascension to leadership is a mainstream historical fact, marking a crucial step in his consolidation of power within the movement. His leadership style is often described as secretive and highly centralized. He wasn't one for grand public pronouncements, preferring to operate through a tight-knit, loyal inner circle. Life in these jungle bases is arduous, food is scarce, often foraged or solicited from remote villages. Malaria and other diseases are rampant. There's the constant threat of discovery by government patrols. Yet, it is in these conditions that the Khmer Rouge cadres are hardened, their ideological commitment tested and deepened. They are learning to live off the land, to move like ghosts through the forest, to survive against the odds. This very survival, this ability to endure, becomes a source of pride and a testament to their revolutionary spirit. It's a bit like an extreme camping trip, except instead of s'mores and ghost stories, you have Marxist indoctrination and guerrilla warfare training. And the bears are definitely more than just a nuisance. The methods of recruitment and indoctrination in these areas are critical. They appeal to the grievances of the rural poor, issues of landlessness, debt, corruption among local officials. They preach a message of national liberation, of restoring Cambodian dignity, and of creating a just society free from foreign interference and decadent urban influences. There's an ongoing scholarly discussion concerning the extent to which the peasantry genuinely embraced the Khmer Rouge ideology versus being coerced or simply seeing them as the only viable alternative to a neglectful or oppressive government. Were they true believers from the outset? Or did they align out of desperation? Or perhaps a misunderstanding of the Khmer Rouge's ultimate, radical aims? The jungle murmurs are the sounds of these cadres moving from village to village, often under the cover of darkness. They hold clandestine meetings, perhaps in a peasant's hut, the only light from a single oil lamp, the faces of those gathered intent, listening to these strange, compelling new ideas. They use simple language, parables, and appeals to traditional values, even as they plan to upend tradition entirely. They are patient, persistent, building their network one convert, one sympathizer at a time. It's a slow, almost invisible process of infiltration and organization. They are like termites, silently hollowing out the foundations of the existing order from below. A rather unflattering comparison, perhaps, but it captures that sense of unseen, relentless activity. The isolation of these jungle bases also allows for the development of a unique and increasingly extreme version of communist ideology, cut off from regular communication with other communist movements, and deeply suspicious of the Vietnamese in particular. Saloth Sar and his inner circle begin to formulate their own highly nationalistic, autarkic, and ultra-agrarian vision. The theories discussed in Paris are now being melded with a harsh, practical experience of guerrilla life and a growing paranoia about enemies, both external and internal. The jungle itself, with its unforgiving nature, perhaps reinforces a belief in the need for absolute discipline, for ruthless struggle, for the purification of society. If you spend enough time battling leeches and snakes, maybe your worldview gets a little prickly. As the 1960s progress, the political situation in Cambodia becomes more unstable. Sihanouk's attempts to navigate the Cold War by balancing relations with the United States, China, and North Vietnam become increasingly fraught. The Vietnam War is escalating on Cambodia's doorstep, and Vietnamese communist forces are using Cambodian territory as sanctuaries and supply routes. This foreign presence further fuels Cambodian nationalism and provides both a pretext and an opportunity for the Khmer Rouge to expand their influence, portraying themselves as the true defenders of Cambodian sovereignty. The jungle, once just a refuge, is slowly becoming a staging ground. The murmurs are becoming more organized, the network more robust. The shadows are deepening, not just in the jungle undergrowth, but across the entire nation. As the forces Saloth Sar is nurturing prepare to step out into the dim, ominous light of a wider conflict, the jungle murmurs we spoke of, those quiet, clandestine efforts of Saloth Sar and his growing Khmer Rouge forces, don't exist in a vacuum. They are happening against a backdrop of increasing national and international turmoil. The late 1960s are a period of immense strain for Cambodia. Imagine the nights in Phnom Penh, no longer just filled with the familiar city sounds and the scent of frangipani, but now also with an undercurrent of anxiety, of hushed conversations about the war next door in Vietnam, about political instability, about an uncertain future. The soft glow from house windows might illuminate families gathered around radios, listening to news that seems to draw closer with each passing month. Prince Norodom Sihanouk, who for so long had skillfully navigated the treacherous currents of Cold War politics, finds his balancing act becoming almost impossible. His decision to allow North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces to use Cambodian territory as sanctuaries and supply lines, the Ho Chi Minh Trail ran partly through Cambodia, was a desperate attempt to maintain Cambodian neutrality and avoid direct conflict. However, this is a mainstream historical fact. The covert bombing campaigns initiated by the United States against these Vietnamese sanctuaries inside Cambodia, starting in 1969 with Operation Menu, dramatically escalated the conflict and destabilized the country. These bombings, kept secret from the American public initially, had a devastating impact on rural Cambodia, causing widespread destruction and civilian casualties. You can almost feel the ground tremble with those distant, unreported explosions. For the peasants in the eastern provinces, the night sky is no longer just for stars. It's occasionally lit by the flashes of B-52 strikes. These attacks, intended to disrupt Vietnamese communist operations, inadvertently fueled resentment against the central government in Phnom Penh, which seemed unable to protect its own citizens, and also drove many terrified and dispossessed Cambodians into the arms of the Khmer Rouge. The Khmer Rouge, quick to capitalize on any misfortune not of their own making yet, portrayed themselves as the only group capable of defending the motherland. It's a classic case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, even if that friend has some very extreme ideas about redecorating the entire country. The political situation in Phnom Penh itself becomes increasingly fractured. Sihanouk, while still popular with many, faces growing opposition from conservative, pro-Western elements within his own government, particularly among the military and urban elite. They are frustrated by his perceived accommodation of the Vietnamese communists, by economic problems, and by his often autocratic style of rule. The air in the capital is thick with intrigue, with rumors of plots and counterplots. The shadows in the corridors of power lengthen. Then, in March 1970, while Sihanouk is out of the country on a foreign tour, he is overthrown in a coup led by his prime minister, General Lon Nol, and Prince Sisowath Sirik Matak. Suddenly, the nation is thrown into even deeper turmoil. Lon Nol's new Khmer Republic is staunchly anti-communist and pro-American. This event fundamentally alters the political landscape and plunges Cambodia headfirst into the wider Indochina War. Sihanouk, from exile in Beijing, makes a fateful decision. He allies himself with his former enemies, the Khmer Rouge, urging his loyal followers to join their struggle against Lon Nol's government. This provides the Khmer Rouge with a huge surge in legitimacy and popular support, particularly in the countryside where Sihanouk is still revered as a god king. It's a political marriage of convenience that would have devastating consequences, like inviting a vampire to dinner hoping he'll just stick to the salad course. Now, the civil war explodes in earnest. The Khmer Rouge, once a relatively small insurgent group, finds its ranks swelling with new recruits, Sihanouk loyalists, those angered by the American bombing, and ordinary Cambodians caught in the crossfire. The nights in rural Cambodia become truly terrifying. Villages become battlegrounds. The distant thud of artillery, the rattle of gunfire, become the new nocturnal soundtrack, replacing the gentle chirping of crickets. You can imagine families huddled in their homes or fleeing into the forests. The meager glow of a hidden oil lamp, their only comfort in a world turned upside down. There's a considerable amount of scholarly deliberation regarding the precise speed and reasons for the Khmer Rouge's rapid expansion of territorial control after 1970. Was it primarily due to Sihanouk's endorsement? The impact of the U.S. bombing, the Lon Nol regime's corruption and incompetence, the military support from North Vietnam, or the Khmer Rouge's own ruthless effectiveness, most likely. It was a confluence of all these factors, creating a perfect storm of chaos from which Saloth Sar and his hardened cadres were perfectly positioned to benefit. They had been preparing for this kind of environment for years in their jungle strongholds. The Lon Nol regime, despite receiving massive amounts of American aid, proves to be corrupt, inefficient, and increasingly brutal. Its army, though well-equipped on paper, is often poorly led and demoralized. The war grinds on, exacting a terrible toll on the Cambodian people. The countryside is ravaged, cities are swollen with refugees, and the fabric of society begins to unravel. The gentle, timeless rhythms of life we imagined earlier are shattered. The darkness of the night now conceals not just the quiet movements of jungle creatures, but the furtive movements of soldiers, the fear of ambush, the quiet desperation of a people trapped in a conflict not entirely of their own making. Saloth Sar, still largely operating from the shadows, consolidates his control over the expanding Khmer Rouge movement. He's known as Brother Number One within the party, though his true identity and his supreme authority are kept hidden from the rank and file, and certainly from the outside world. The organization, known simply as Angkar, the organization, develops an aura of mystery and omnipotence. It demands absolute loyalty and unquestioning obedience. The seeds sown in Paris and nurtured in the jungle are now sprouting into a formidable, disciplined, and utterly ruthless revolutionary force. The nation is in turmoil, and Angkar is poised to reap the whirlwind, the quiet before the storm has passed. The storm itself is now raging, and the deepest darkness is yet to come. The storm we spoke of, the Cambodian Civil War, rages for 5 brutal years. The nation, once an oasis of seeming calm, is now a landscape of sorrow and destruction. Lon Nol's Khmer Republic, despite massive American support, finds itself increasingly isolated, its territory shrinking, its capital, Phnom Penh, besieged. Imagine the city in those final weeks, Early 1975. The nights are punctuated not by the gentle sounds of urban life, but by the crump of incoming artillery shells, the distant crackle of gunfire drawing ever closer. The once vibrant boulevards are now patrolled by weary, jumpy soldiers. Food and supplies are dwindling. The city is swollen with refugees. Hundreds of thousands of people who have fled the fighting in the countryside, now trapped, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion. The air is thick with the scent of fear, and perhaps the metallic tang of cordite hanging in the humid pre-dawn mist. The Khmer Rouge, now a battle-hardened army, relentlessly tightens its noose around Phnom Penh. Saloth Sar, still largely a shadowy figure to the outside world and even to many of his own soldiers, directs the final offensive. The commanders in the field are ruthless and disciplined. Their young soldiers, many of them peasant teenagers who have known nothing but war, are driven by a potent combination of ideology. Sihanouk's blessing, though Sihanouk himself is far away and largely powerless within the movement, and a desire for victory. The end, when it comes, arrives with a strange suddenness. On April 17, 1975, the Khmer Rouge forces enter Phnom Penh. This is a pivotal mainstream historical fact. The fall of Phnom Penh to the Khmer Rouge marked the end of the Cambodian Civil War and the beginning of their horrific reign. The final night before the city's fall must have been one of unbearable tension. Perhaps an eerie quiet descended as the Lon Nol government crumbled, its leaders fleeing or preparing to surrender. The usual sounds of shelling might have subsided, replaced by an even more unsettling silence, pregnant with the unknown. Families huddle in their homes, behind shuttered windows, the flicker of a single candle their only light, wondering what the dawn will bring. Will it be liberation from the war or something else? There's a desperate hope, perhaps mixed with a profound dread. Then, as the sun rises on that fateful April day, the black-clad soldiers of the Khmer Rouge begin to appear on the streets. They are young, stone-faced, heavily armed. Many are clearly from the countryside, looking out of place amidst the urban landscape. There are accounts of initial relief, even celebration, among some of the city's residents. The war, at least, is over. No more shelling, no more fighting. Some people come out to greet the arriving soldiers, offering them water, food, even flowers. For a brief moment, there's a fragile hope that peace might finally return. It's like the calm in the eye of a hurricane, a deceptive stillness before the other side of the storm hits with even greater fury. But the atmosphere quickly changes. The Khmer Rouge soldiers are not like any victorious army the city has seen before. They are silent, disciplined to an unnerving degree, and they show no interest in fraternizing or celebrating. Their expressions are often blank, unreadable. There's a coldness about them, an ideological purity that is deeply unsettling. Some scholars debate the psychological state of these young soldiers, many of whom were barely teenagers, brutalized by years of war and indoctrination. Were they automatons, simply following orders, or did they genuinely believe in the radical transformation they were about to impose? It's a chilling question, with no easy answers. Almost immediately, strange orders begin to circulate. The Khmer Rouge announced that the city must be evacuated. All 2 million inhabitants, long-term residents and recent refugees alike, are told to leave. The reasons given are varied and often contradictory. The Americans are about to bomb the city. There isn't enough food to feed everyone. It's necessary to cleanse the population of corrupting urban influences. People are told it will only be for a few days. Angkar has a plan. They are assured, Angkar will take care of you. The organization, that omnipotent, unseen entity. It's like your new landlord showing up and saying everyone has to leave immediately because they're reorganizing the feng shui with absolutely no further explanation, and also, you can only take what you can carry. Panic and confusion erupt. People are forced out of their homes, out of hospitals, patients still on operating tables, women in labor. They are given no time to gather belongings, no provisions for the journey. The streets, which moments before might have held a flicker of hope, become scenes of chaos and despair. The victorious soldiers, so recently seen by some as liberators, are now enforcers, their rifles prodding, their voices harsh. The hot Cambodian sun beats down mercilessly on the throngs of people being pushed out onto the roads leading away from the city, towards an unknown and terrifying future. The fall of Phnom Penh is not just a military victory. It is the beginning of one of the most radical and brutal social experiments in human history. Saloth Sar, now firmly in control, though still largely invisible, is about to implement his vision of Year Zero, an attempt to completely erase Cambodia's past and create a new agrarian utopia. The city, with its intellectuals, its merchants, its culture, its history, is seen as a source of corruption, something to be emptied and purified. The ominous arrival is complete. The black-clad figures are no longer at the gates. They are in control. The night that falls on Phnom Penh this time is of a different kind. It's a night of emptied streets, of silent, shuttered houses, of a city forcibly drained of its lifeblood, and under the cloak of this new darkness, the true nature of Angkar's plan begins to unfold. A plan that will turn the entire country into a landscape of unimaginable suffering. The gentle lapping of the Mekong River, which flows through the now deserted capital, seems to whisper a lament for what has been lost and what is to come. The sun that rose on April 17th, 1975, over Phnom Penh, illuminating the arrival of the Khmer Rouge, soon sets on a city in the throes of an unimaginable upheaval. As darkness descends, it doesn't bring the usual urban hum, the distant sounds of traffic, or the murmur of evening commerce. Instead, an eerie silence begins to claim the emptied streets, broken only by the shuffling feet of those still being forced out, or the occasional harsh command from a black-clad soldier. This is the true dawn of Year Zero. It's not just a catchy slogan. It's a terrifyingly literal ideology. The Khmer Rouge, under the guiding hand of Saloth Sar, now more commonly known within the party by his nom de guerre, Pol Pot, intended to restart Cambodian history, everything that came before: culture, religion, family ties, education, money, personal possessions, was to be abolished, eradicated. It was as if society itself was a chalkboard, and Angkar was determined to wipe it clean with a very rough, very abrasive eraser. The announcement, or rather the series of brutal orders, for the evacuation of Phnom Penh and other urban centers is swift and uncompromising. There is no negotiation, no appeal. Angkar has decided, and that is final. You can imagine the sheer bewilderment. One moment, you're a city dweller, a shopkeeper, a teacher, a student, a civil servant. The next, you're part of a vast, bewildered column of humanity being marched out into the countryside with no destination given, no provisions made. The night offers no respite, only a different kind of terror. The roads are choked with people, the elderly being carried, children weeping, the sick and injured stumbling along. The only light comes from the moon, if it's out, or perhaps the glint of starlight on a rifle barrel. The sounds are of hushed cries, the scraping of feet on dusty roads, the occasional barked order. One mainstream historical fact is that the Khmer Rouge emptied Phnom Penh, a city of over 2 million people, including refugees, in just a few days. This forced exodus was not just a chaotic consequence of war. It was a deliberate policy, a foundational step in their plan to create a purely agrarian, collectivist society. They believed cities were inherently corrupt, parasitic entities, breeding grounds for capitalism, intellectualism, and foreign influence, all anathema to their vision of a purified Khmer race. So, the cities had to die for their utopia to be born. It's a bit like deciding your house needs a spring clean and starting by dynamiting the entire neighborhood. Effective, perhaps, in achieving a blank slate, but not generally recommended for good neighborly relations. The journey out of the cities is a nightmare. People are forced to leave behind almost everything. Valuables are confiscated or simply discarded. Family members get separated in the crush. Those who resist, question, or simply cannot keep up are dealt with harshly. The Khmer Rouge soldiers, many of them indoctrinated teenagers, display a chilling indifference to suffering. They are the instruments of Angkar's will, and Angkar is an unforgiving master. The heat of the Cambodian day gives way to the cool of the night, but there is no rest. The column shuffles on, a river of displaced humanity flowing into an unknown, terrifying future. You can almost feel the dust coating your skin, the ache in your legs, the gnawing fear in your stomach. There's a significant point of discussion among historians regarding the internal Khmer Rouge rationale and planning for this evacuation. Was it a long, premeditated strategy? A core tenet of their ideology from the jungle days? Or was it a more improvised response to the fall of the cities, perhaps driven by fears of urban resistance or an inability to manage such large populations? While the radical ideology certainly pointed towards deurbanization, the sheer speed and brutality of the execution suggest a complex mix of fanaticism and perhaps even a degree of panicked control. It's hard to know if they had a detailed manual titled How to Empty a Metropolis in 72 Hours for Dummies, Revolutionary Edition, or if it was more of a make-it-up-as-you-go-along catastrophe. As the urban populations are driven into the countryside, they are designated as New People, or April 17th people. They are viewed with intense suspicion by the Khmer Rouge, seen as tainted by city life and bourgeois habits. The Old People, the rural peasantry who had lived under Khmer Rouge control in the liberated zones for longer, are considered more reliable, the true revolutionary base. This division between new and old people becomes a critical distinction, often a matter of life and death in the years to come. The new people are given the hardest labor, the least food, and are subjected to constant surveillance and re-education, which often meant brutal indoctrination or worse. The concept of Year Zero extends beyond just emptying cities. Money is abolished, markets cease to exist, religion is banned, monks are defrocked, temples desecrated. Education, beyond basic Angkar-approved indoctrination, is shut down. Family structures are attacked, communal living and eating are enforced. Children are encouraged to spy on their parents. The goal is to atomize society, to break all old loyalties and replace them with a single, all-encompassing loyalty to Angkar. The darkness that covers the land is not just the absence of electric lights, which are, of course, a decadent urban luxury. It's a darkness of the spirit, a deliberate extinguishing of everything that makes life familiar and meaningful. Imagine trying to navigate this new world. Everything you knew is gone. Your home, your profession, your family ties, your very identity, all stripped away. You are now simply a cog in Ankar's vast agricultural machine. The soft rain that might fall on you as you trudge along a country road offers no comfort, only another layer of misery to your already desperate plight. The stars, usually a source of wonder, now look down on a landscape of enforced silence and fear. The chilling announcement of Year Zero wasn't made from a grand podium. It was delivered through the barrel of a gun, through the forced march, through the destruction of a way of life. And this is only the beginning. The true depths of what Year Zero means for the Cambodian people are yet to be fully revealed. In the rice paddies and killing fields that await them, the forced exodus from the cities and towns is complete. You, along with millions of others, the new people, have been driven into the countryside, into a landscape that is supposed to be the heart of Pol Pot's agrarian utopia. But the dream of a classless, prosperous society built on collective farming quickly devolves into a nightmare. The fields of Cambodia, once symbols of life and sustenance, become fields of sorrow. As night falls over these vast, newly established agricultural cooperatives, there is no comfort, only exhaustion and a gnawing dread of the dawn, which will bring another day of relentless, back-breaking labor. The air, which in the old villages might have carried the scent of cooking fires and the sound of family chatter, now is often silent, heavy with unspoken fear and the smell of damp earth and human sweat. Life in these communes is brutal beyond imagining. The Khmer Rouge, in their fanatical pursuit of Year Zero, attempt to transform the entire population into a single, undifferentiated mass of peasant laborers, former doctors, teachers, lawyers, artists, monks. Anyone with an education or a connection to the old regime are particularly targeted, but everyone is forced to work in the rice paddies, digging irrigation canals, or on other agricultural projects, often with the most primitive tools, or even their bare hands. The working days are incredibly long, from before sunrise until well after sunset, often 12 to 15 hours, with minimal rest. It's like the universe's worst internship, where the pay is starvation and the only career progression is to an early grave. One mainstream historical fact is that the Khmer Rouge's economic policies, including the collectivization of agriculture and the abolition of money and markets, led to a catastrophic collapse in food production. Despite forcing the entire population into agricultural labor, their ill-conceived and brutally implemented plans resulted in widespread famine. They dreamed of exporting vast quantities of rice to fund their revolution, but they couldn't even feed their own people. The irony is as bitter as the watery gruel that often constituted the day's only meal. You can picture the scene: endless lines of emaciated figures, clad in the shapeless black pajamas that become the uniform of democratic Kampuchea, toiling under the scorching Cambodian sun. The nights are spent in crowded, often unsanitary communal barracks, where sleep is fitful, punctuated by the cries of the hungry or the sick, or the terrifying sound of someone being dragged away by Khmer Rouge cadres. There is no privacy, no personal space. Family units, if they haven't already been broken up during the exodus, or by arbitrary Khmer Rouge decree, are systematically undermined. Children are separated from parents, husbands from wives, all in the name of loyalty to Angkar. Angkar is your only family now. Angkar knows best. It's the ultimate helicopter parent. If the helicopter was armed and had a penchant for ideological purges. The food rations are pitifully small, often just a can of rice shared among many, or a thin soup with a few grains of rice and perhaps some leaves. Starvation becomes a constant companion. People resort to eating anything they can find: insects, roots, leaves, even rats, though being caught doing so could mean severe punishment or death, as it was considered stealing from Angkar. The physical toll is immense. Bodies waste away, strength ebbs, disease, malaria, dysentery, beriberi, runs rampant with no medicine available, as doctors and modern medical practices were part of the old world that Angkar sought to destroy. Traditional remedies are sometimes whispered about in the dead of night, but even these are risky. There is considerable disagreement among academic experts regarding the exact number of people who perished under the Khmer Rouge regime from starvation, disease, overwork, and execution. Though most estimates range from 1.7 to 2.2 million people, roughly a quarter of Cambodia's population. The term killing fields often evokes images of mass execution sites, and those certainly existed, places where the night would be filled with unimaginable horrors. But the entire country, in a sense, became a killing field, a place where death was a daily, almost mundane occurrence, whether from a Khmer Rouge rifle or from the slow, agonizing grind of hunger and exhaustion. The psychological torment is just as severe as the physical. The constant fear, the arbitrary cruelty, the loss of all personal autonomy, the requirement to feign enthusiasm for Angkar's policies, the demand to attend endless indoctrination sessions where you chant slogans and confess your bourgeois tendencies. It all works to break the human spirit. You learn to show no emotion, to trust no one, as even a sigh or a sad glance could be interpreted as dissent. The nights, while offering a temporary cessation of labor, bring their own terrors. It's when the cadres often come to take people away for re-education, from which they rarely return. The soft rustling of leaves in the wind, or the croaking of frogs, sounds that once might have been soothing, now could mask the footsteps of approaching death. Yet, even in these fields of sorrow, tiny acts of resistance, of humanity, persist. A whispered word of comfort, a shared morsel of stolen food, a silent prayer in defiance of Angkar's atheism. These are small lights in an overwhelming darkness. People cling to memories of their past lives, of their loved ones, even as Angkar tries to erase them. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, that even when faced with such systematic dehumanization, the spark of who you are, of what you love, is so hard to extinguish. It's like trying to put out a star with a teacup. The effort is monumental, the success unlikely. The agrarian utopia, Pol Pot's grand vision, is built on a foundation of bones and watered with tears. The moon, hanging pale in the night sky over the silent, suffering land, is perhaps the only witness to the full extent of this tragedy. The fields of sorrow we've journeyed through, those landscapes of forced labor and starvation, are not merely the result of economic mismanagement. They are the direct consequence of a rigid, fanatical ideology. The ideological chains forged in Pol Pot's mind and imposed with crushing force upon the Cambodian people. As night descends on the communes, on the emptied cities, on the entire nation held captive, it's not just physical darkness that reigns, but an intellectual and spiritual one too. This is the darkness of an extreme vision, a vision that tolerates no dissent, no deviation, no remnant of the past. Pol Pot's ideology, often described as an ultra-Maoist or extreme agrarian communist doctrine, was a peculiar and deadly brew. It combined a romanticized notion of the ancient Khmer peasant, untainted by foreign influence, with a radical, distorted interpretation of Marxist-Leninist principles. He and his inner circle, the shadowy Angkar, envisioned a completely self-reliant, classless, agrarian society, purified of all enemies, intellectuals, city dwellers, ethnic minorities, religious figures, and anyone with ties to the former Lon Nol regime or, ironically, to foreign powers, despite their own ideological borrowings. One mainstream historical fact is that the Khmer Rouge regime declared 1975 as Year Zero, explicitly stating their intention to reset Cambodian society and history entirely. This wasn't just rhetoric. It was a guiding principle for their every brutal action. They wanted to turn the clock back, not just a few years, but centuries, to an imagined golden age of peasant purity, conveniently forgetting that even ancient Khmers probably enjoyed a bit of music and didn't subsist solely on watery rice gruel. The imposition of this vision is absolute. Every aspect of life is controlled by Angkar. The night is a time when this control often feels most palpable. It's when the cadres, usually young and thoroughly indoctrinated, hold their meetings, discussing quotas, identifying slackers or counter-revolutionaries. It's when the new people are often subjected to intense indoctrination sessions, forced to confess their past crimes, like having owned a book or known how to speak French. Imagine sitting in a dimly lit hut, the air thick with fear, listening to a teenage soldier drone on about the glories of Angkar and the evils of individualism, knowing that your life could depend on feigning enthusiastic agreement. It's like being trapped in the world's most terrifying and poorly written school play, where heckling the actors gets you sent to a re-education camp, which is definitely not summer camp. A central tenet of Pol Pot's ideology is an extreme form of xenophobic nationalism. Anything considered foreign is suspect. This extends not just to Western influences, but also, and increasingly, to Vietnamese influence. Despite the crucial support the Khmer Rouge received from North Vietnam during the Civil War, Pol Pot harbored a deep-seated suspicion and hatred of Vietnam, rooted in historical animosities. This paranoia about external enemies inevitably fuels a paranoia about internal enemies. If the revolution isn't progressing as planned, and with mass starvation and societal collapse, it clearly isn't. Then it must be the fault of traitors, spies, and saboteurs lurking within. This leads to the devastating purges that rip through Cambodian society, and even through the ranks of the Khmer Rouge itself. No one is safe. Accusations, often baseless, fly thick and fast. A careless word, a perceived lack of revolutionary zeal, a connection to someone already purged. Any of these can be a death sentence. The nights are filled with the terror of a knock on the door, of being summoned by Angkar, never to be seen again. The darkness conceals the trucks rumbling towards execution sites, the muffled sounds of brutality. The very air seems to hum with suspicion. The nature and extent of these internal purges are subject to ongoing examination by historians and researchers. While the targeting of former Lon Nol officials and new people was widespread and systematic from the beginning, the purges within the Khmer Rouge ranks themselves reveal the depth of Pol Pot's paranoia and his ruthless consolidation of power. He saw conspiracies everywhere, particularly plots allegedly orchestrated by Hanoi. Entire zones and party factions are liquidated. Comrades who fought alongside him in the jungle are arrested, tortured, and executed. S-21, the infamous Tuol Sleng prison in Phnom Penh, becomes the terrifying epicenter of this internal cleansing process. The ideological chains bind the mind as well as the body. People are forced to participate in self-criticism sessions, denouncing themselves and others. Children are indoctrinated to believe that Angkar is their true parent, and that loyalty to the organization supersedes all other bonds. It's an attempt to create the new Cambodian, a being stripped of individual thought, existing only to serve the state. The soft glow of a communal fire, which in another context might signify warmth and community, here often illuminates faces taut with fear, as people try to navigate the treacherous currents of revolutionary orthodoxy. It's like everyone is forced to walk a tightrope, blindfolded, over a pit of crocodiles, while someone keeps changing the rules of gravity. Good luck with that. The extreme vision demands the destruction of the past. Libraries are burned. Ancient temples are defaced or turned into storehouses. Artists and musicians are eliminated. The rich cultural heritage of Cambodia is systematically attacked. Angkar wants a blank slate, and anything that carries the imprint of history, of learning, of beauty that doesn't conform to its narrow, brutalist aesthetic must be erased. The silence of the Cambodian night, once filled with traditional music or the chanting of monks, is now a silence born of fear and cultural desolation. Pol Pot's vision, in its horrific totality, aimed to create a society unlike any seen before, a society of absolute equality achieved through absolute terror. The ideological chains he and his inner circle forged were meant to bind an entire nation to this vision. But these chains not only crushed the Cambodian people, they also, inevitably, began to consume the revolution itself as paranoia and violence turned inward. The dream of a purified utopia became a self-devouring nightmare, played out in the darkness, under the indifferent gaze of the stars. The ideological chains we've felt tightening, the purges sweeping through every level of Khmer Rouge society, find their most terrifying institutional expression in a place known as S-21. Tuol Sleng. Before Year Zero, it was Chao Phanhea Yat High School, a place of learning, of youthful chatter, the scrape of chalk on blackboards, the hopeful sounds of a future being built. Now, under the suffocating darkness of Angkar's rule, it has become something else entirely. As night descends upon the largely deserted city of Phnom Penh, the former school grounds are eerily silent, yet pregnant with an unspeakable, methodical horror. The only lights visible might be the dim, functional glow from windows where guards keep their vigil or interrogators meticulously document their grim work. The silence here is not peaceful. It's the silence of suppressed screams, of utter despair, of lives systematically extinguished. S-21, also known as Tuol Sleng Infiltration and Interrogation Center, was the Khmer Rouge's main security prison. This is a mainstream historical fact. An estimated 17,000 to 20,000 people were imprisoned at S-21 between 1975 and 1979, and only a handful, perhaps a dozen, are known to have survived. It was a place where suspected enemies of the revolution, particularly those from within the Khmer Rouge ranks accused of treason or spying, were brought for interrogation, torture, and confession before their inevitable execution at nearby Chuang Ek, one of the many sites that came to be known as the Killing Fields. Imagine the chilling transformation classrooms converted into tiny, crude cells, gymnasium equipment repurposed into instruments of torment. The ghosts of laughter and learning are overshadowed by the palpable presence of unimaginable suffering. It's as if the very walls have absorbed the terror, a place where even the air feels heavy, cold, despite the tropical heat. You can almost sense the oppressive stillness of the prison at night, the shuffling sounds from within the cramped cells, the clanking of chains, the low murmurs of guards. Perhaps the distant, incongruous sounds of the emptied city, a dog barking, the wind whistling through deserted buildings, only serve to amplify the isolation and dread of those held within. The prisoners, stripped of their names and identities, are reduced to numbers. They are photographed, their biographies meticulously recorded before they are subjected to brutal interrogation methods designed to extract confessions, often to ludicrously fabricated conspiracies. The Khmer Rouge were obsessed with documentation, a chillingly bureaucratic approach to their barbarity. It's like they were trying to get a gold star for most organized annihilation. The confessions obtained under duress are often elaborate fantasies, implicating networks of supposed traitors, leading to further arrests, further purges. It's a self-perpetuating cycle of paranoia and death. The interrogators, often young and thoroughly desensitized, follow strict protocols. Their job is to smash the enemies of Angkar, to extract the truth as defined by the party. The silence of S-21 is punctuated by the rhythmic, chilling sounds of this process, the scratch of a pen documenting a forced confession, the low, metadichny voice of an interrogator, the almost imperceptible whimpers from those broken beyond resistance. The intellectual origins and the precise operational mandate of S-21 are points that continue to generate scholarly inquiry. How did such a place, so systematic in its cruelty, come to be? Was it a direct emulation of other totalitarian prison systems, or a uniquely Cambodian manifestation of Pol Pot's paranoid vision? The leadership of S-21, most notably Kang Gwek Eov, known as Comrade Dush, a former mathematics teacher, oversaw its operations with a chilling efficiency. He, like Pol Pot, had once been an educator, now tasked with erasing not just individuals, but the very concept of dissent. One shudders to think what kind of lesson plan he was following here. Introduction to Existential Despair 101. Perhaps, with a practical exam in surviving the unsurvivable, the prisoners endure conditions designed to break them physically and psychologically long before they even reach the interrogation rooms. Overcrowding, starvation, minimal sanitation. The same horrors found in the agricultural communes are concentrated and intensified here. The silence of many prisoners is the silence of profound weakness, of spirits crushed. They are shadows of their former selves, trapped in a bureaucratic machine of death from which there is almost no escape. The night offers no reprieve, only the heightened fear of what the next day, or the next hour, might bring. Perhaps a flickering lamp outside a cell door casts elongated, dancing shadows, transforming familiar objects into monstrous shapes, mirroring the distortion of humanity that S-21 represents. The very ordinariness of the school buildings, the barred classroom windows, the dusty courtyards where children once played, makes the horror even more grotesque. It's a stark reminder of how easily the mundane can be twisted into the malevolent. This wasn't some medieval dungeon. It was a place of education, repurposed for extermination. It's like finding out your friendly local bakery has a secret side hustle running a global syndicate of evil. Profoundly unsettling, and makes you question the quality of their sourdough. The silence of S21 is also the silence of the world outside, which for a long time remained largely unaware of the specifics of what was happening within Cambodia. Within these walls, the Khmer Rouge regime sealed the country off, creating a black hole of information. It's only later, after the regime's fall, that the full, sickening details of S21 and the wider genocide emerge through the discovery of its meticulous records, the haunting photographs of its victims, and the testimonies of the few survivors. As you imagine standing outside its walls on a humid Phnom Penh night, the only sound might be the rustle of leaves in the overgrown former schoolyard. But it's a loaded silence, filled with the weight of all the lives that were brutalized and extinguished here. S21 is a testament to the depths of human cruelty when driven by fanatical ideology and unchecked power. A place where the silence screams louder than any sound. The darkness within its confines is absolute, a chilling void where humanity was systematically undone. The chilling silence of S21, that bureaucratic abattoir we just visited in our minds, is not just a monument to the suffering of its victims. It's also a symptom of a deep sickness within the Khmer Rouge regime itself. The ideological chains that Pol Pot and Angkar forged to bind the nation have become a python, coiling ever tighter, beginning to crush the very body of the revolution. As the nights wear on in democratic Kampuchea, a different kind of darkness spreads, the darkness of internal suspicion, of escalating paranoia, leading to cracks within the seemingly monolithic facade of power. The revolution, in its perverse logic, starts to devour its own children, and then its own siblings, and eventually, it seems, it would have eaten its own limbs if given enough time. The purges we've touched upon were not isolated incidents. They became a defining feature of Pol Pot's rule, especially from 1977 onwards, initially targeting new people and remnants of the old society. The focus increasingly shifts inward. Seasoned Khmer Rouge cadres, regional commanders, even members of the Central Committee who had fought alongside Pol Pot for years, find themselves accused of being CIA agents, KGB spies, or, most commonly, Vietnamese sympathizers. It's a terrifying game of revolutionary musical chairs, where the last one standing is Pol Pot, and everyone else is, well, purged. The night air in areas controlled by different Khmer Rouge factions must have been thick with tension, each rustle of leaves potentially heralding the arrival of an arrest squad from a rival, or even a centrally directed unit. One mainstream historical fact is that these internal purges significantly weakened the Khmer Rouge regime by eliminating experienced military commanders and administrators, creating widespread fear and mistrust within its ranks, and provoking armed rebellions in some regions. Instead of strengthening the revolution, the constant search for enemies within hollowed it out, making it more brittle and vulnerable. It's like trying to build a sturdy house by constantly accusing your builders of sabotage and then, just to be safe, removing a few key support beams each night. Surprisingly, the house doesn't tend to stand up very well. You can imagine the atmosphere within the party. No one truly feels safe. Loyalty is constantly questioned. The smallest deviation from the ever-shifting party line, a perceived lack of enthusiasm for the latest brutal policy, or simply being from the wrong zone or having the wrong connections, could lead to a one-way trip to a place like S21, the darkness of the jungle, which once offered refuge and a base for their revolutionary aspirations, now potentially hides enemies from within their own movement. Clandestine meetings are held, not just to plot against the old enemies, but to guard against, or perhaps to plot against, internal rivals. The revolution has become a viper eating its own tail. The paranoia is particularly acute regarding Vietnam. Pol Pot's deep-seated animosity towards the Vietnamese, who were fellow communists but also historic regional rivals, reaches fever pitch. He sees Vietnamese influence everywhere, believing Hanoi is constantly plotting to undermine his regime and turn Cambodia into a puppet state. This leads to increasingly aggressive cross-border raids by Khmer Rouge forces into Vietnamese territory, attacking villages and massacring civilians. These are not just minor skirmishes. They are deliberate provocations, a manifestation of Pol Pot's belief that Cambodia must assert its strength and purity against its larger neighbor. The night sky along the eastern border is lit not by gentle starlight, but by the flash of gunfire and the glow of burning huts. There remains a degree of academic uncertainty as to whether Pol Pot's aggressive stance towards Vietnam was primarily ideologically driven. A fanatical desire for racial purity and an almost mythical reclaiming of lost territories, or a desperate, reckless gamble to unify his fracturing regime against a common external enemy. Perhaps it was a combination of both. When your domestic policies are leading to mass starvation and your internal purges are creating chaos, sometimes picking a fight with the bigger kid next door seems like a brilliant diversionary tactic. Spoiler, it rarely is. These attacks, unsurprisingly, provoke a strong reaction from Vietnam. The cracks within the Khmer Rouge regime offer an opportunity for Hanoi. Disaffected Khmer Rouge cadres, fleeing the purges, begin to seek refuge in Vietnam, providing intelligence and eventually forming the nucleus of a Vietnamese-backed Cambodian resistance movement. Men like Heng Samrin and Hun Sen, who would later become key figures in post-Pol Pot Cambodia, are among those who escape the purges and align with Vietnam. The night is no longer just a cover for Angkar's enforcers. It's also a cover for those fleeing its murderous wrath, slipping across borders, carrying stories of the horrors within. The internal decay is evident not just in the purges and defections, but also in the sheer dysfunction of the state, the attempt to micromanage every aspect of life, to centrally plan an entire agrarian economy with no expertise, no infrastructure, and a terrified, starving workforce is an unmitigated disaster. Local cadres, often uneducated and brutalized, interpret Angkar's vague directives in wildly inconsistent and often incredibly cruel ways. The communication lines are frayed, not least because so many experienced personnel have been eliminated. The organization that was supposed to be omniscient and omnipotent is, in reality, becoming increasingly chaotic and self-destructive. As the paranoia deepens, so does the isolation. Democratic Kampuchea becomes almost entirely cut off from the outside world, save for its increasingly strained relationship with its main patron, China. Pol Pot's vision of a completely self-reliant nation is achieved in the most perverse way by becoming a hermit kingdom, a pariah state, stewing in its own ideological poison. The darkness that envelops Cambodia is one of its own making, a self-imposed exile from the community of nations and from basic human decency. The moon, looking down on this land of sorrow and fear, sees a regime teetering on the brink, its foundations crumbling from within, its own ideological fervor consuming it like a raging fire in a house made of dry tinder. The cracks are no longer just whispers, they are gaping fissures, and the entire edifice is beginning to groan under the strain. The cracks within Pol Pot's regime, those deep fissures carved by paranoia and relentless purges, are not just internal weaknesses. They become gaping invitations to an external force. Vietnam, having endured escalating Khmer Rouge border attacks and now hosting a growing number of Cambodian defectors eager to overthrow Pol Pot, decides to act decisively. As 1978 draws to a close, the humid Cambodian nights are filled with a new kind of tension, a new kind of dread, but for some, perhaps, a flicker of desperate hope. The sounds of distant artillery and the rumble of engines are no longer just the echoes of internal strife or Khmer Rouge aggression. They herald the approach of a full-scale invasion. On December 25, 1978, Vietnamese forces, accompanied by Cambodian defectors who have formed the Kampuchean United Front for National Salvation, launch their offensive. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Vietnamese invasion of Cambodia swiftly overthrew the Khmer Rouge regime, capturing Phnom Penh on January 7, 1979. For the Cambodian people, who have endured nearly 4 years of unimaginable horror under Angkar, this intervention is a deeply complex event. It spells the end of Pol Pot's reign of terror, but it also means another foreign army on Cambodian soil. The night, which for so long symbolized the terror of Angkar, now brings the sounds of a new war, a war of liberation, but a war nonetheless. Imagine the scene in a Cambodian village as the Vietnamese troops arrive. The villagers, gaunt and traumatized, emerge cautiously from their communal huts. The black-clad Khmer Rouge cadres, who once held absolute power of life and death, are now either fleeing in disarray or have been captured or killed. There must be a sense of stunned disbelief, of dazed relief. The iron grip of Angkar is broken. Food, however scarce, might no longer be a death sentence if found outside official rations. The constant fear of being dragged away in the middle of the night for some imagined infraction might finally begin to recede. It's like waking from a years-long nightmare, only to find your house is still shaking from the aftershocks and there are new, heavily armed guests in the living room. The Vietnamese advance is remarkably swift. The Khmer Rouge forces, weakened by internal purges and facing a conventional, well-equipped army, largely crumble, though they don't entirely disappear. Pol Pot and his remaining loyalists retreat towards the Thai border, melting back into the jungle terrain where their movement was first nurtured. They will continue to wage a guerrilla war for years to come, but their control over the country is shattered. The nights in Phnom Penh, once emptied and silent under Khmer Rouge rule, now echo with the sounds of Vietnamese tanks and troop movements. The city, or what's left of it, is liberated, but it's a scarred, haunted shell of its former self. The cost of this liberation is immediate and manifold. There is, of course, the human cost of the invasion itself, though relatively brief. More significantly, Cambodia finds itself under the occupation of its historical rival, Vietnam. While many Cambodians undoubtedly welcome the Vietnamese as saviors who ended the genocide, the long-term presence of Vietnamese forces and the establishment of a new government heavily reliant on Hanoi raise complex questions of sovereignty and independence. There is an ongoing debate among historians and political analysts concerning the motivations and long-term consequences of Vietnam's intervention. Was it primarily a humanitarian act to stop a genocide, a defensive measure against Khmer Rouge aggression, or an opportunistic move to assert regional dominance? The truth, as is often the case in such complex geopolitical dramas, likely involves elements of all three. For the survivors, the end of Khmer Rouge rule means an almost unimaginable freedom, but also a profound reckoning with what has happened. The fields of sorrow begin to give up their secrets. Mass graves are discovered. The full extent of Angkar's barbarity is laid bare. The silence that cloaked the nation for so long is broken by cries of grief as people search for lost family members, as they begin to tell their stories. The night, for so long a time of terror, slowly, tentatively, starts to become a time for whispered remembrance, for shared sorrow, and perhaps for the first fragile shoots of healing. Though, healing from something like this isn't like getting over a common cold. It's more like learning to live again after your entire world has been incinerated. The international reaction to the Vietnamese intervention is mixed and largely driven by Cold War politics. The United States, China Pol Pot's main backer, and many ASEAN countries condemn the Vietnamese action as a violation of Cambodian sovereignty. In a perverse twist of international diplomacy, the Khmer Rouge, despite their genocidal record, continue to hold Cambodia's seat at the United Nations for many years, supported by those who oppose Vietnam's influence. It's a situation that would be darkly comical if it weren't so tragic. The architects of a genocide being treated as legitimate representatives while the nation they destroyed struggles to rebuild under foreign supervision. It's like giving the arsonist a seat on the fire safety board. The Vietnamese install a new government, the People's Republic of Kampuchea, led by Khmer Rouge defectors like Heng Samrin. This government faces immense challenges: a devastated country, a traumatized population, ongoing civil war with the remnants of the Khmer Rouge, and international isolation. The nights are still not entirely safe. Khmer Rouge guerrillas launch raids from their border sanctuaries. Banditry is rife. The infrastructure is shattered. Rebuilding Cambodia, brick by painful brick, spirit by shattered spirit, will be the work of generations. But the machinery of mass murder has been stopped. The ideological chains have been, for the most part, broken. The liberation, whatever its costs and complexities, has brought an end to year zero and the unspeakable suffering it unleashed. The soft rain that falls on the Cambodian landscape now might begin, ever so slowly, to wash away some of the blood and tears, though the scars will remain etched deep in the land and its people. The Vietnamese tanks have rolled through, and the immediate, overt terror of Pol Pot's Angkar has receded from the heartlands of Cambodia, retreating with its die-hard remnants to the jungled frontiers. But the land they leave behind is fractured, profoundly broken. Imagine the nights that follow this liberation. They are no longer filled with the systematic dread of Angkar's purges, but they are saturated with a different kind of sorrow, the sorrow of recognition, of unearthing the true scale of the abyss from which the nation has just been pulled. Families, or what's left of them, begin the desperate search for one another, trekking across a ravaged countryside, their hearts heavy with a mixture of hope and foreboding. The dim light from a single candle in a makeshift shelter might illuminate tear-streaked faces as stories are shared, as the names of the lost are whispered into the darkness. Cambodia in the early 1980s is a nation of ghosts and survivors. The physical infrastructure is shattered: roads, bridges, hospitals, schools, All lie in ruins or severe disrepair, but the invisible scars are even deeper. Nearly an entire generation of educated people, doctors, teachers, engineers, artists, has been wiped out. The trauma is almost universal. Everyone has lost someone. Everyone has witnessed horrors that defy description. The social fabric, so deliberately shredded by the Khmer Rouge with their attacks on family, religion, and community, needs to be painstakingly rewoven, thread by fragile thread. It's like trying to assemble the world's most complex jigsaw puzzle, where most of the pieces are missing, and the instruction manual was written by someone who actively hated puzzles. One mainstream historical fact from this period is the establishment of the People's Republic of Kampuchea (PRK), the government installed by Vietnam, which, despite its dependence on its creators and its international isolation barring the Soviet bloc in India, began the monumental task of restoring basic services and a semblance of order. This included reopening schools, often with unqualified but willing survivors as teachers, and trying to restart agricultural production to combat the devastating famine left by the Khmer Rouge. The nights in Phnom Penh, slowly repopulating, begin to see a few more flickering lights, hear a few more human sounds, tentative signs of a city stirring from a coma. The process of rebuilding is agonizingly slow. The country is desperately poor, still facing an ongoing civil war with the Khmer Rouge and their allies, including, ironically, royalist factions still loyal to Sihanouk, who opposed the Vietnamese presence, who are ensconced along the Thai border and propped up by international powers wary of Vietnam. Resources are scarce, and the international community, for many years, offers little direct aid to the PRK government due to its Vietnamese backing. It's a cruel irony the nation is punished for being liberated by the wrong liberator, at least according to the geopolitical chess masters of the time. It's like being rescued from a burning building, only to be fined for the water damage caused by the firefighters. The psychological rebuilding is perhaps even more challenging. How do individuals, and an entire society, come to terms with such profound trauma? The nights are long, and for many survivors, they are filled with nightmares, with memories that refuse to fade. The simple act of trusting another person, of forming relationships, is fraught with difficulty after years when betrayal could be a death sentence, and Angkar sought to sever all human bonds. There's considerable ongoing research by psychologists and sociologists into the long-term effects of the Cambodian genocide on survivors and subsequent generations. The legacy of trauma is complex, manifesting in various ways, from PTSD and depression to profound resilience and a deep desire to rebuild and remember. The search for justice is another critical aspect of this fractured land's attempt to heal. What to do about the perpetrators of the genocide? Many Khmer Rouge leaders, including Pol Pot himself, remain at large in their jungle redoubts, continuing their insurgency. The desire for retribution is strong, yet the path to accountability is fraught with political and practical obstacles. The PRK government holds some trials in absentia, but the major architects of the genocide are beyond their reach. The silence of the international community regarding justice for the victims of the Khmer Rouge during these early years is deafening to many survivors. It seems the world is more interested in geopolitical maneuvering than in confronting the horrors that Angkar unleashed. Yet, even in this devastated landscape, life, with its incredible tenacity, begins to reassert itself. Markets slowly reappear. The vibrant heart of Cambodian daily life, music, silenced for so long, is heard again. Perhaps a lone musician playing a traditional instrument in the dim evening light. The melodies both sorrowful and hopeful. Religious practices, driven underground, resurface as pagodas are slowly restored and monks, those who survived, begin to reappear. Children, who have known nothing but war and starvation, start to learn what it means to play, to laugh, even if their laughter is sometimes shadowed by the things they've seen. The Cambodian spirit, though battered and bruised, is not extinguished. It's like a resilient bamboo shoot pushing its way through concrete, improbable, perhaps, but fiercely determined to reach the light. The nights in this fractured land are still tinged with sorrow, with the weight of memory, but they also begin to hold the quiet hum of rebuilding, of reconnection, of a people determined to reclaim their future from the ashes of their past. The journey is long and arduous, and the ghosts of year zero will linger for generations. But the first, most difficult steps out of the darkness have been taken. The moon, looking down, sees not just a landscape of graves, but also a landscape of nascent hope, of a people slowly, painstakingly, learning to live and dream again. The fractured land of Cambodia, as we've seen, begins its slow, arduous journey of rebuilding, of trying to piece together a future from the shards of its shattered past. The nights, once thick with the terror of Angkar or the chaos of war, gradually transform. They are now filled with the sounds of a nation striving to heal, yet forever marked by the shadows of what it endured. As you imagine Cambodia in the decades that follow the fall of Pol Pot, picture the moon casting its gentle light on a landscape where ancient temples stand near freshly filled mass graves, where the laughter of children in a newly built school might echo near the silent, haunting walls of a place like S21. The past is never truly past. It's woven into the fabric of the present, a constant, often unspoken, presence in the Cambodian night. One of the most significant developments in the long quest for accountability is the establishment of the extraordinary chambers in the courts of Cambodia, ECCC, commonly known as the Khmer Rouge Tribunal. This hybrid court, supported by the United Nations, began its work in the early 21st century to prosecute senior leaders and those most responsible for the atrocities committed during the Khmer Rouge regime. This is a mainstream historical fact. The ECCC has successfully prosecuted and convicted several key figures, including Kang Gwek Iav, Comrade Duc, the former head of S21, as well as Nuon Chea and Khieu Samphan, two of Pol Pot's closest deputies. These trials, though slow and fraught with political complexities, represent a crucial, if incomplete, step towards justice for the victims. Pol Pot himself, the architect of the genocide, evaded formal justice, dying in his jungle hideout in 1998 while under house arrest by his own former comrades. It's a rather anticlimactic end for someone who caused such monumental suffering. No grand trial, no final reckoning, just fizzling out. History, it seems, sometimes forgets to write a satisfying final chapter for its villains. The lingering questions surrounding memory and justice are profound. How does a nation remember such an overwhelming trauma without being consumed by it? How can justice truly be served when the scale of the crimes is so immense, when so many perpetrators were themselves victims, coerced or brutalized into compliance? There is ongoing societal discussion within Cambodia and among international scholars about the efficacy and legacy of the ECCC. Did it go far enough? Was it too late? Did it provide a sufficient sense of closure for the survivors? These are not easy questions. and the answers often depend on whom you ask. Some feel the trials were essential for establishing a historical record and holding key individuals accountable. Others point to the limited number of prosecutions and the political compromises involved. The task of preserving memory falls not just to courts and historians, but to the survivors themselves and to new generations. Museums like Tuol Sleng Genocide Museum, the former S21, and the Koong Ek Genocidal Center, one of the main killing fields, stand as stark, painful memorials, educating visitors about the horrors that occurred. The Documentation Center of Cambodia has played a crucial role in collecting testimonies, mapping grave sites, and fostering research and education. The nights are filled with the silent work of archivists, researchers, and storytellers, piecing together the fragmented narrative of Year Zero, ensuring that the victims are not forgotten, and that the truth of what happened is preserved against any attempt to deny or distort it. It's a race against time as the generation of survivors ages, their first-hand accounts becoming ever more precious. It's like trying to save all the books from a library that someone tried to burn down. You can't save every page, but every rescued word is a victory. And what are the haunting lessons from this dark chapter? Pol Pot's Cambodia stands as a terrifying testament to the dangers of utopian ideology taken to its extreme, of unchecked power, of dehumanization, and of the world's sometimes tragic indifference. It reminds us how fragile civilization can be, how quickly a society can descend into barbarism when critical thought is suppressed, when leaders demand absolute obedience, and when difference is equated with treason. The story of Angkar is a chilling case study in how a desire for radical purity, for a complete break from a supposedly corrupt past, can lead to the destruction of everything human. It makes you think twice about anyone promising a perfect world, especially if their plan involves demolishing the current one with absolutely no public consultation. As you listen to the gentle sounds of the imagined Cambodian night around you, perhaps the distant hum of a city that has learned to live again, the soft rustle of palm leaves, the chirping of crickets that have outlasted empires and ideologies. Consider the resilience of the human spirit. Despite enduring unimaginable suffering, the Cambodian people have shown an extraordinary capacity to survive, to rebuild, to forgive though not necessarily to forget, and to find a way towards a more peaceful future. Their journey is a powerful reminder that even in the deepest darkness, the desire for life, for connection, for meaning, can persist. The questions linger, hanging in the soft, warm air. How do we prevent such atrocities from happening again, anywhere in the world? What is our collective responsibility when we see the warning signs of mass violence and dehumanization? How do we honor the memory of victims in a way that fosters true healing and reconciliation? These are not just questions for Cambodia. They are questions for all of humanity. The shadows of the past may be long, but they also serve to highlight the light that endures, the light that guides us towards a better understanding of ourselves and our shared history. The night is growing deeper now, the story drawing to its close. Let the sounds around you become softer, more distant. The journey we've taken has been through shadowed valleys, through fields of sorrow, but always with a gentle respect for the immense weight of this history. The air feels cooler, perhaps, as the deepest hours of the night unfold, bringing a sense of calm, a quietude that allows for reflection. The echoes of the past are fading into a gentle hum, like the distant sound of the Mekong River flowing steadily towards the sea. carrying its ancient memories. Feel the tension in your shoulders ease, your breathing slow and deepen. The world outside your window is quiet, wrapped in the embrace of the night. You are safe, and the journey, though somber, has reached its end. The stories of history, even the darkest ones, can teach us, can make us pause, and then can gently release us back into the peace of our own present moment. Let the quiet envelop you like a soft blanket. The world will wait. For now, there is only the stillness, the gentle darkness, and the promise of rest